state has one issue to raise before the jury comes out, please.
Okay.
As the court ordered defense to let the state know on defendant statements, any redactions they want to make. We did hear from them last night, and we were working on that. In the process of doing that, we had looked at Defense Exhibit 266, and that is a transcript that they had prepared by a certified court reporter, Jan Marie Glaze. I'm sure the court recognizes that she worked in the building for over a decade. And in comparing that, I'm looking at her last page. She certified that it was from the recording that she received from Puget Law Group. We went to go make redactions and looked at that recording compared to their transcript, and there are several pages of transcript that are missing. Several questions of the audio that are missing in their transcript and spliced together. We have significant concerns about that. We're working to now get that transcript transcribed by a certified court reporter in full. But there are multiple areas, both in the middle of the transcript and in the end, that have segments regarding the hobble that Mr. Collins had, where it was placed, and also on page 11, there's about 2 pages of transcript when compared to what Pierce County Sheriff's Department put together that are missing. So we're working on having that done to have for tomorrow. I wanted to report to the discrepancy on it, and I'm not sure what the issue is with that. It wasn't, I would have expected it to be noted by Ms. Glaze that it was a portion or a redacted audio recording that she transcribed it from.
What exhibit is this, counsel?
2,666. It's defense. It doesn't say redacted in her.
It says on the exhibit list.
In her certification, it does not say redacted. It's reported as being a complete transcript from the audio.
Exhibit number list says it's a redacted transcript.
There's nothing in the transcript for blacked out redactions.
Well, I'm not
I
sure.
have a copy of this full exhibit. Like, the state has this full transcript as well. So, this is just a version that's missing pages.
It's missing sections that were spliced together to appear as if it was a full recording, Your Honor.
But, Ms. Nicolavo, you have this full transcript, correct? Of this interview.
We have 19 pages that was provided by defense. It is not a full transcript of the audio.
No, but you have this same recording. You have this same interview, the full version of it,
We
right?
have Pierce County Sheriff's Department did a recording of the interview.
Okay, and you have that full recording.
We do.
And you also have a transcript of that full recording.
Not from defense. This is purported to be a
No,
full
but you
Answer the
gave
question.
to
Do
us.
you have it or not?
Yeah, just answer the question.
transcript of it. What I'm saying is the exhibit that was presented.
Do you, I don't, I just want this question answered.
Yes,
Do you have the full transcript?
we have, not a certified transcript, no. We have.
Do you have it?
Just gave it to us
Hold on,
yesterday.
hold on. Do you have it?
What are you talking about?
Yes or no?
No, we don't.
You don't have the full transcript?
No, not a certified transcript. No,
That
we
may
have
be
a
different.
transcript that was provided by Pierce County Sheriff's Department, not certified, right?
The full
We have that.
the full transcript.
Yes,
Okay.
and then we were provided by defense a certified transcript that was purported to be of the entire recording, based on her certification.
None of this matters to me at this point, because nobody's offered it.
Your Honor, we planned on offering it tomorrow, and we emailed defense.
You were planning to offer the,
Gave us a copy.
hold on, hold on, Mr. Conrad. Hold on. You were planning to offer the defense proposed exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor, because we thought it was a full certified transcript.
That's fine.
And so we thought that would be the better route to go. We actually went and had Rankin and Burbank's transcribed.
Right. But none of this matters to me. You're going to get your certified transcript, right? You already talked to Ms. Glaze.
No, Your Honor, we have to send it out to somebody, because what Ms. Glaze provided as a certified complete transcript is
Right.
not.
I thought you,
We can provide that. I don't know why those pages are missing from that exhibit, but we can provide you the full transcript, just like the one you already have from Pierce County. Just like the recording that you already have of the full thing. So you trying to insinuate that we're trying to do something nefarious is absolutely not well taken, Ms. Nicolavo, because you have the full transcript, you have the full recording.
look, the whole thing is boring. When you want to present the statement from any of the officers, then we'll deal with whatever problem exists at that time. I'm assuming you guys will work out whatever the logistics are here, and it won't be a problem. Meanwhile, I have no interest in this.
Your Honor, I just note that the court's exhibit is not accurate. So
Well, that may be.
we will get it done, expedited, and present it tomorrow.
That's fine. And if there's something wrong with the exhibit, then presumably it won't get admitted. But at the moment, it's not been admitted, so it's not a concern. It seems to me this is the kind of thing you guys should have worked out on your own. You don't need to bring it to me. Anyway, are we otherwise ready for the jury?
Well, Judge, a question related to that. Is the state going to be asking to publish the transcript, or are they just, there's an audio recording? I would expect that they're just going to play the audio recording, minus the identification of the attorney in it.
Well, that's what I thought we were doing when we talked about it yesterday. Ms. Eakes talked about, well, it's an audio recording, when we talked about redactions.
We're working on the redactions. We were working on those last night, and that's how we realized that the transcript didn't meet up to the audio. So we will, the intent, Your Honor, is to admit the audio, play the audio, provide the jurors the transcripts
To
follow
read along.
with the hearing. I'm sorry.
To read along.
Yeah. That's the intent.
Okay, well, great. Now are we ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
Let's have the jury. And I understand that we're now doing cross-examination of Mr. Mell? Okay. Is Mr. Mell in the courtroom? Will someone go get him? Thank you, Ms. Nicolabo. Mr. Pertzer, is this going to be you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Welcome back, Mr. Mell.
Where's it plugged in? Going over there somewhere. Oh, maybe it was.
Sometimes you have to push and hold that for a second. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. Okay, Mr. Purzer, cross-examination.
Investigator Mell, good morning.
Morning.
Just kind of refreshing where we left off yesterday. Is, understand your testimony, you arrived at the scene about 1:10 in the morning on March 4th, correct?
Correct.
And you had contact with, I believe it was Lieutenant Macinio.
Correct.
And do you recall any other officers or detectives at the scene?
Well, I remember several.
Okay. And it sounds like they're doing various tasks there at the scene of checking various aspects of the area out.
Correct.
And you're doing the Faro scan initially,
Correct.
and then you took photographs.
Yes.
And want to hand you what's been admitted is exhibits 159, 160, 161, and 162. And just let me know if those are photographs that you took.
Yes, they appear to be photographs that I took.
Okay, because that's what Investigator Wilkins said that you took those, just want to close the circle. Your Honor, we could publish exhibit 159. I'm not sure who's got that.
Fine with me. Did you say 161 as well, or just
Yes,
150?
Judge. Oh, I'm sorry, just a second. Is 161 been amended?
I was just checking on that. I can't see that it is. I don't think so.
It doesn't indicate. Well, let me back up a step. Investigator Mell, with respect to exhibit 161, what is that what is that item?
It's a photograph of the patrol car that was in the intersection.
And that is the true and accurate representation of the photograph you took that evening?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, offer 161.
No objection.
No, I understand. It is there.
Right, 159 is showing, but he's asking about 161. You don't have to put it up yet. He's looking at the physical one, right?
Yes, yes, Your Honor. This is 161 that I'm looking at.
Yeah. Any objection to 161? I heard the state say no objection, I thought. Mr. Conrad?
No objection.
Sorry, Ms. Brenner.
Okay, great. All right, so-
161 is admitted.
Thank you, Judge. Investigator Mell, just coming down the board here, if you want to come down, or actually you're seeing, that is the photograph of the patrol car.
Yes, it is.
That's at the intersection itself.
Correct.
And there's a photograph of, appears to be a box of donuts.
Correct.
Great. And we can see you 160, please. And 160 is a close-up of the box of donuts.
Yes, I don't have that on my screen here, but, oh, there it is. Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you said you did not collect that item at the scene.
Correct. It was decided that we didn't need to collect it.
Do you know if anybody collected it?
I do not.
Okay. And you said yesterday that you took a photograph of a water bottle that was by the garbage cans.
Correct.
And again, you took that for potential evidentiary reasons, correct?
Yeah, we took the photograph to document that it was there.
When you're just doing photographs generally of the scene, it sounds like you're over-inclusive as to what you might take photos of.
We try to be, yes. Try to fully document everything that might be there, at least with photographs.
Very good. And when you arrived there at the scene, did you know much about what had transpired earlier?
Upon initially arriving, no, I had a very brief, description of what had happened.
Sure, the detective says just get to work, correct?
Once they got, I guess, an investigative team there, we did have a little bit more of a briefing, and then it was, yes, get to work.
Very good. And then 161, please. Mel, do you have that on your screen as well?
I do.
And what is that photograph of?
It's a photograph of the patrol car, more specifically the passenger's side window of the patrol car.
And did you see items on the window that were of interest to you?
Yes.
Okay. If we could show 162 to the investigator. And sir, what is that photograph of?
It's a more close-up photograph of the same passenger window, capturing what appeared to be some white powder and some streaking going down the glass.
Okay. And the box of donuts was a box of powdered raspberry donuts?
Correct.
And did it appear that the streaking and the marking on the window was consistent with powdered sugar?
Yes.
Take the zip from you. Excuse me. An investigator, aside from taking photographs here at the scene, did you have any other involvement with this case?
Several weeks later, I did take some additional photographs of the clothing items that were turned in from the medical examiner's office.
Okay, so on the, you were there on the 4th, March 4th.
Correct.
I think it was like March 20th or something like that she came back out.
Yes, it was in our lab.
Okay, and aside from taking photographs and doing the FARO-scan, did you have any other involvement in this?
No, sir.
Great, thanks. That's all the questions I have.
Ms. Strasser?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Couple questions. When you arrived at the scene just after midnight, the scene was secure, is that right?
Correct.
Can you tell the jury what secure means?
That means that some of the initial responding officers would have taped off the area to basically secure that location, which in this case was the intersection, and then they would try to prevent any other activity or movement within that scene.
And we've seen some photographs, not in your testimony, but earlier, where there was some yellow tape that was adhered to poles and things around the area of this intersection. Is that part of the securing process?
Yes, sir.
And is that to prevent folks from coming in and interfering with the integrity of the scene?
Yes.
Okay. And who was responsible for that in this case? Do you know?
I don't know. Usually that falls on the the initial officers that are responding, and once they realize they need to secure that area, they deploy that tape.
All right. And in a situation where there's an in-custody death like this, it's not unusual for another agency to take over that investigation, is it?
That's how things are being handled today. Yes.
Right. So in this case, Pierce County Sheriff's Department took over the scene once Mr. Ellis had passed away. Is that fair?
Correct.
And is it Sergeant Leffel Holtz?
I believe it's Lieutenant now, but I think at the time it was Sergeant Leffelholtz, yes.
And Sergeant Leffel Holtz was present at the scene when you arrived. Is that right?
Yes, he was there.
And he was controlling the scene to maintain the integrity as well.
Yes, he was part of our command staff there.
And another mechanism in place to preserve the integrity is what's called a log of who's coming and going from the scene. Is that right?
We typically run an incident log, so we do know who's coming and going from the scene, yes.
Meaning so for instance, you, Investigator Mell, when you show up, you got to sign in, right, on the log
Correct.
with the time that you arrived,
Correct.
and then when you leave, you sign out the time that you left.
Yes.
And so anybody who comes into that area that's cordoned off by the tape has to do that so that we know who's been in the scene itself, right?
They are supposed to, yes.
Okay, and that was done in this case.
I believe so.
All right. If I understood correctly, you spoke to, I think he was a sergeant at the time, but Messenio.
Yes.
Okay. And he was on scene when you got there?
Yes, he was the first person that I encountered.
Are you aware that, I'll just call him Sergeant, for purposes of this,
Okay.
that Sergeant Messina was actually on scene after the second unit from TPD arrived.
I did not know that at that time, no.
Did he discuss with you observations of Mr. Ellis being restrained in person? He observed these things in person?
I did not hear that from Messinio.
Okay, so you weren't aware of that at the time that you documented this scene?
Well, I understand the question that Messinio made comments to that.
Okay.
I do not know that, I mean, he never made any of that comment to me.
I guess I should have qualified that. He didn't say those things to you, but you were aware he was present earlier in the interaction with Mr. Ellis?
No.
Okay.
I was not aware that he was involved with any interaction with Mr. Ellis at that time.
Okay. But he was on scene when you got there?
Yes.
Did he provide you some information about what he thought was significant about documenting that area?
Right when I first encountered Messinio, I was given a very brief description of what had occurred. He was also very active in trying to get the proper command staff there. So like I said, it was a very brief interaction with him.
Understood. So you were aware that County, Messinio and Gary Sanders were present at some point?
Yes,
Okay. And they're both Pierce County Sheriff Department employees?
correct.
There were also Lakewood police officers present. Were you aware of that?
I'm not aware of any Lakewood police officers, but I mean, there could have been.
Okay. How about Washington State Patrol? Were you aware Washington State Patrol officers were present on scene during this interaction?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. But at least 4 separate law enforcement agencies potentially on scene at some point?
I know there was a lot of officers.
If you know the answer, sir.
I know there was a lot of officers, specific cities or states or whatever their jurisdiction might be. I'm not sure.
Understood. Okay. All right, and so Mr. Pertzer had you document or testify about some of the observations about the patrol vehicle. With the court's permission, I'm going to show you, it's been marked as 2731, 2732, and 2733. May I push that? Go ahead and take a look at each of those exhibits, and once you've had a chance to review them, can you look up at me and we'll talk about each one individually.
Okay.
Do you recognize those 3 exhibits?
Yes, I do.
So let's start with 2731. Did you take that photograph?
I believe I did, yes.
And can you describe what's depicted in that photograph?
It's another photograph of the patrol car, specifically the front passenger's window, and it's also, once again, capturing the white powder and smearing that's going down the window.
From a different perspective than the one we just looked at?
I'd have to see the one that we just looked at. I mean, it looks like a very similar perspective.
Okay, maybe closer up.
Yeah,
A fair and accurate depiction of what you observed that, I guess, early morning of March 4th.
yes.
All right, Your Honor, I move for admission of 2731.
No objection.
No objection. No objection.
2731 is admitted.
Permission to publish.
Proceed.
Do you have your pointer with you?
There is one here.
With the court's permission, can you step down? Officer Mell, do you see a horizontal line across the passenger side window consistent with powdered sugar deposit on that exhibit?
I do see a horizontal line right here, like in the middle of the photograph.
Yeah. And that's how it appeared when you saw it on the 4th?
Yes.
And directly above that, do you see some, looks like deposits of powdered sugar, maybe 6 or 8 inches above that horizontal line?
Yes, I do.
And can you point those out for the jury so we know what we're looking at?
Yes, so we have the deposits of white powder in these areas.
It appears as though they're streaking both above and below those. Is that how it appeared to you when you took the photograph?
Yes.
Consistent with the window maybe going up or down?
Yes, that would be my assumption.
All right, thank you. If I could have you look at 2732, and you can do it standing, the other exhibit if you want, because I'm going to have you do the same thing.
Okay.
Let me grab it for you. 2732? What's depicted in 2732?
2732 is a close-up image of the powder deposits on the passenger window.
So the deposits I had you describe as 6 or 8 inches above the horizontal line? In
Yes.
the previous photo? All right. Does it fairly and accurately depict those?
Yes, it does.
You're gonna remove for admission 2732.
No objection.
No objection from the state.
2732 is admitted.
Permission to publish that as well.
Proceed.
Officer Mell, can you describe what we're looking at here?
Yes, once again, this is the passenger window of the patrol car, and these are the powder deposits that were observed in the streaking.
All right, and directly below that on the ground beneath the door was the box of powdered sugar covered donuts,
Correct.
consistent with those accounting for these marks.
Yes.
And then the last one I wanted you to look at was 2733. I'll trade you. And what are we looking at in 2733?
2733 is once again the passenger side of the patrol car, more specifically the passenger window. It's kind of more of a mid-range photograph that we have in it.
And does it also contain the area surrounding the passenger window, meaning the door jamb or frame?
Yes, it does.
And is that how it appeared on March 4th, 2020 when you took the photograph?
Yes.
You're in with admission 2733.
No objection.
No objection, Mayor. No objection from the state.
2733 is admitted.
And permission to publish that as well.
Proceed.
All right, and so can you point out to the jury the door frame, the black door frame portion adjacent to the passenger side window for us, so we know what we're looking at?
I understand you're asking about this black
Yes, sir.
portion.
And do you see some smudging on that portion of the door frame as well?
Yes, there is some smudging kind of right in the middle of that area.
And that also contained a white powdery substance that we've seen in the other photographs?
I believe there may have been some white powdering in there as well.
Okay. And that's how you found the scene just after midnight on the 4th of March 2020?
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Oh, you can sit down. Ms. Nicolavo asked you whether there was any sort of analysis done to determine what this substance was on the window. And I think you said there hadn't been, is that right?
Correct.
Was there any reason to believe it was anything other than the powdered sugar associated with the donut box below it?
No.
One of the exhibits that Mr. Pertzer had you look at, if I can have republished, it's 160. All right, can you see 160 in front of you, Investigator Mell?
Yes, I can.
And can you see as you're looking at the donut box, the right corner portion of the box appears to be separated?
Correct.
And on the ground next to the donut box, to the left as you're looking at it, appears to be powdered sugar deposits on the concrete down below?
Yes.
And is that how it appeared that early morning as well?
Yes.
Ms. Nicolavo asked you about some green wires that were not, I guess, seized, I don't know what the right word is, taken into custody or into property in this case. Do you remember her asking that yesterday?
Yes.
Do you remember explaining to the AG's office when they interviewed you that those looked like they'd been there for some time?
They looked like they had been there for, who knows how long they could have been there. Yes.
And that's because they looked like they'd been there for some time, meaning in that position?
I don't recall making that specific comment, but
For permission, I'm going to hand you Claims Exhibit 883.
Proceed.
Is that okay, Judge? Should that yours? Yeah, sorry. you look at 883, you know what 883 is?
It appears to be an interview report that I had with the Attorney General's office.
Do you recall having an interview with the Attorney General's office?
Yes.
Do you remember when you had that interview?
The exact date, I do not recall.
With looking at the front of that, refresh your memory as to when you would have had that?
Yes, it would.
And go ahead and refresh your memory.
It appears that this was done on April 14th of 2021.
All right, so 4 charges were filed in this case?
Yes.
All right. And if I could turn your attention to page 3 or 4 of that exhibit. And if you could go to the middle section, there's a paragraph that starts, investigator Mell was asked about a green wire-looking item. Do you see that paragraph?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead and read that to yourself and see if that refreshes your memory about what you told the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
Do you recall telling Investigator Heitzman and the Attorney General's office that it looked like that wire had been there for a while?
Apparently that is what I said, yes.
As an explanation as to why you didn't collect it, right?
Correct.
And no indication that that was related to Mr. Ellis in any way, shape, or form, right?
I had no indication that it was related to Mr. Ellis.
On scene, Investigator Mell, did you ever find, or did anybody, as far as you know, find Mr. Ellis's wallet?
Not to my knowledge.
Did they find a backpack associated with Mr. Ellis?
Not to my knowledge.
Anything other than, well, I guess, did you notice anything else at the scene that could have been property of Mr. Ellis that you didn't document?
Not to my knowledge.
Because you would have documented it if you thought it was relevant to this investigation.
I would have hoped so, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. No questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
You follow up, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Investigator Mell, you were advised of hobbles being used as restraints in this case.
Foundational, proceed.
Yes, I heard that Mr. Ellis had been hobbled.
And did you retrieve and take into evidence, take into property any hobbles at the scene?
No.
Were you made aware of by anyone at the scene of the hobbles location?
No.
You testified with Mr. Officer that you didn't know if the green wires, or in the picture it's previously been testified as depicted as headphones, were related to Mr. Ellis. You didn't have any indication one way or another regarding any of the evidence that was on the scene as being related.
It's also vague. Restate it, please.
Defense counsel officer asked you on cross-examination if you had any indication of the headphones being related to Mr. Ellis. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And when you arrived at the scene, you got a very brief briefing from Lieutenant Massidio, I believe?
Yes.
Did you have any extensive knowledge on what had occurred prior to going through and documenting the scene?
I'm sorry, re-ask that question.
Did anybody relate to you the details of what had occurred prior to going through and documenting the scene?
Like I said, a very brief description of what had occurred.
And as you were documenting the scene, did you receive information from anyone that gave you additional information of what happened?
Not that I can speak of, no.
And you testified that the photograph of the patrol vehicle appeared to have prints on the side, left side of the window, kind of the door frame area outside the window. You recall that?
Yes.
You recall when you were interviewed by the AG's office you didn't recall there being any prints?
I guess during that interview, I don't know that that was commented on.
You should go ahead and, I believe you still have that exhibit in front of you, the summary of that interview.
Yes.
Okay, if you take a look at page 3 of 4, about 3/4 of the way down. Would be 3 paragraphs up.
Okay.
Does that refresh your memory on whether or not you were asked if there were any prints?
Yes. At the time of this interview, I did not recall there being prints on the door.
And if at the time of taking the photograph, on scene, if you had believed those to be prints, would you have had those processed?
I would have looked at them closer, probably, yes, to see if there was any actual ridge detail associated with those versus being just a smudge or a smear.
And in this case, you didn't have that done at the scene, correct?
Correct.
And you were asked several questions about what appears to be powder on the window from both defense counsel Osser and from defense counsel Purser. You remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And with your training and experience, if there is a substance in question at the scene, is it standard to have that substance tested?
Objection, foundation, with this witness.
Sustained.
Part of your duties obtaining samples of substances at the scene for further testing?
If it appears to be a questionable substance, yes.
And in this incident, did you obtain any samples of any substances at the scene?
No.
You were also asked about a backpack being taken into evidence or provided to you at the scene. You recall Mr. Osser indicating that to you?
I remember being asked about a backpack, yes.
And if Detective, actually I think he was Sergeant at the time, if Sergeant Sanders recalled providing you a backpack, would you have documented that in your report?
Object to leading form, Judge.
Spoken brings attention.
I'll sustain the objection.
If anyone provided you information about a backpack at the scene, is that something you would document?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
No.
And if you had conclusions about any substance at the scene as being of significance, would you have included that in your report?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
I was not suspicious of any substance at the scene.
Nothing further.
Investigator, I'm just curious, when you were meeting with the Attorney General's office a couple of years ago, did they show you any photographs as they were interviewing you?
I don't recall.
It doesn't reference it in the report, I was curious if you had an independent recollection.
I'm sorry?
It doesn't reference that you were shown any photographs in the report, I'm just curious if you had an independent recollection that occurred.
No.
Sure, thanks, that's all.
I'll just stay here. Ms. Nikolava asked you about the smudging on the door frame being consistent with a handprint. That was pretty clear in the photograph, right?
Yes.
And that's how it appeared, right?
Yes.
She also asked you if you had any sort of analysis on this white substance, and I think I wrote down you said, if it appears to be questionable. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And you had no question that this was consistent with powdered sugar in this case, right?
Correct.
There was nothing else to account for what you saw there other than the box of donuts directly below the strike marks and the powdered sugar on the window, right?
Correct.
All right, further questions?
Nothing further, Your Honor, thank you.
Nothing from the state, Your Honor, thank you.
They were good.
Okay. Mr. Miller, thank you very much. You're excused.
Okay.
Dr. Dan Wardelerner, if I may go get him, please.
Sure,
Can I retrieve it? I think I left some exhibits at this.
go ahead. Yes, sir, please come forward to right about here and raise your right hand to be sworn. Solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank
Please
you,
have,
Your Honor.
please have a seat right here. Please state your name and please spell your name.
Daniel Wohlgelerner, Daniel, D-A-N-I-E-L, Wohlgelerner, W-O-H-L-G-E-L-E-R-N as in Nancy, T as in Thomas, E-R.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Wardelerner, and I'm probably not saying that exactly right, so I apologize, but it's my best pronunciation of it. Can you tell the jury where you employed?
I'm a cardiologist, and my practice is in Santa Monica, California.
And how long have you been a cardiologist?
Since 1983.
And do you work at a hospital, or do you have your own practice?
I have my own practice. I'm also on staff at a hospital in Santa Monica called Providence St. John's.
And what's your role at Providence St. John's?
I have a medical staff role as section chief of cardiology, which means that I'm involved in quality assurance, interacting with other departments like nursing, emergency department, and dealing with any issues with those interactions.
And how long have you worked at St. John's?
Since 1989.
And have you always had the current role that you just described, or have you had other roles there?
I've had other roles. The current role, I think, is now about 6 years. Previously, I was director of the cardiac care unit at St. John's Hospital.
And can you tell the jury just generally, what is cardiology?
So cardiology is the area of medicine that deals with the diagnosis and treatment of conditions affecting the heart and the major blood vessels.
And can you give the jury an idea of like what kind of patients do you see, what kind of problems do they have?
So I see patients with a wide spectrum of conditions, people that have had heart attacks, people that have had arrhythmias of various types, people that have congenital heart disease, people that have heart disease that has developed as a result of inflammation or other degenerative disorders. I also see people that haven't yet had heart problems but are at risk because of a strong family history or strong risk factors that they personally have, like high blood pressure or diabetes, and they're seeing me because they want to help prevent having any heart disease.
And what type of procedures do you perform for your patients?
So I do diagnostic procedures to check the heart, ultrasound examinations of the heart, known by the name echocardiogram, monitoring studies that are done both in the office but also monitoring that the patient has, that it's a wearable device that they can wear for days or weeks, so we can determine if they have any irregular rhythm, and if so, what the nature of that abnormal rhythm is. We also do nuclear scans of the heart to check circulation of the heart arteries, and also do CAT scans to look at the heart arteries to see if there's any blockage of the arteries.
And how long have you been a cardiologist?
Since 1983.
And can you tell the jury just a little bit about your educational background, where you went to medical school?
Yes, I went to Yale University School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut, received my MD degree in 1977, and then continued at Yale for all of my postgraduate training, which included 4 years in the field of internal medicine, and then 2 years in subspecialty training in cardiology.
And what is internal medicine?
Internal medicine is the broad area of medicine that deals with conditions that affect the internal organs, which include the heart, the lungs, digestive system, endocrine glands, and nervous system.
And do you have a CV that kind of lays out your history as well as your work history as well as your education, the publications, those things?
Yes.
If you could take a look and just to be shown to the witness exhibit 536, please. It'll come up on your screen, Doctor.
Yes.
And do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And is that the current copy of your CV?
Yes.
All right. And what does your CV cover?
It covers my education, training, professional appointments, awards, and publications.
I move to admit 536.
Sustain the objection.
All right, we can just
He can
walk-
he can testify about these
All right,
matters.
we'll walk through some of your history since, just to kind of talk about it for a minute. All right, so let's just talk a little bit more about your work history. So you told us about your work at St. John's Hospital. Where did you work in addition to St. John's Hospital as a cardiologist?
So after I finished my training at Yale Medical School, I was offered a position on the faculty at Yale, which I accepted in the Department of Cardiology. So I worked at Yale for 2 years. And then UCLA Medical School in Los Angeles invited me to join their faculty. And it was a promotion in the academic world, so I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast in 1985 and joined the UCLA faculty. And I was on the full-time faculty there for 2 years, and then went into the private practice of medicine and cardiology, stayed on the clinical volunteer faculty at UCLA for many years after that, and moved to Santa Monica, where I currently practice, in 1989.
Okay, and what is an interventional cardiologist?
So an interventional cardiologist is a cardiologist who, in addition to doing general cardiology issues along the lines of which I discussed, will also do procedures that are used primarily to look at the heart arteries and do procedures to open up blocked arteries. That includes balloon angioplasty, using a miniature balloon to squeeze open an artery, implanting coronary stents, S-T-E-N-T-S, which are metal tubes that are put inside the arteries to basically as a scaffold to keep them propped open. There are also devices that basically scrape plaque out of arteries. And the newer generation of interventional cardiology now includes doing valve replacement, which previously only could be done through open heart surgery, now can be done with catheters, eliminating the need for surgery.
And have you worked then as an interventional cardiologist?
Yes, I did for 30 years.
And are you doing that work now?
No.
And can you tell us, with respect to your training and background, do you have any training as in pulmonary medicine, or medicine that involves the lungs?
Well, I'm not subspecialty trained in pulmonary medicine, but as someone board certified in internal medicine, that includes pulmonary medicine. So I've had exposure and training to pulmonary medicine, but I do not consider myself a formally trained expert in pulmonary medicine.
And you mentioned board certification. What does that mean?
Board certification in the field of medicine means that you have attended a training program that is certified and that you've graduated that program meeting all requirements, and that you have passed a national standardized examination, which back when I took it was 2 days of intensive written examination on the field in question.
And as a cardiologist, a board-certified cardiologist and board-certified in internal medicine, do you treat patients or do you deal also with pulmonary issues for your patients?
Yes. Again, I'm not saying that I'm a specialist in pulmonary medicine, but I've certainly had exposure and training. And there's a great deal of overlap in conditions that affect the body. So I'm a cardiologist, but I'm not only taking care of the heart, because there are issues that interact with the heart. So, for example, I'm often asked to evaluate someone who has shortness of breath symptoms. So the shortness of breath symptoms may be due to the heart, they may be due to the lungs, they may be due to both. So I'm involved in that process of assessing the patient and determining what are the major contributing factors. I may also refer the patient to a pulmonary specialist for additional sophisticated testing that I cannot provide in my office.
And as in your role as a cardiologist in internal medicine, have you treated people with substance abuse issues?
Yes, I have.
Can you just tell us in what context you've done that?
Well, there are different types of substance abuse, and depending on how you define it. There's, cigarette smoking can be considered substance abuse. Alcohol can be considered substance abuse. I've certainly treated many, many patients in those categories. I've also treated patients with who have had cocaine substance abuse issues and methamphetamine substance abuse issues as well.
Okay, can you tell us about your experience treating people with methamphetamine substance abuse? Thank you.
So in California, we have had a great deal of methamphetamine substance abuse issues. I imagine that's the case over here in Tacoma and Washington State as well. And this really started in the early 2000s, that it really became a problem, at least a problem that we all recognized. And from the early 2000s until 2019, I was actively rotating through the emergency room as a cardiologist. So there would be a panel of cardiologists who would see people coming into the emergency room. So over that period of time, around 2005 to 2019, I would see someone who had methamphetamine substance abuse issues, really on a once-a-month basis on average, who came into the emergency room where there were concerns about cardiac complications potentially related to methamphetamine.
And are you familiar then with some of the cardiac or with the cardiac implications of someone who's been on methamphetamine?
Yes.
Now, I just want to ask you briefly about publications. Have you ever been published?
Yes.
And what kinds of publications have you had?
So I have published articles in the past, predominantly in the field of cardiology, and specifically dealing with coronary artery disease, meaning blocked heart arteries. And I've published articles in various medical journals, and also have published textbook chapters relating to these topics as well.
In your work, have you ever served as an expert witness before?
Yes.
And can you just give us an idea of how long you've been doing that?
So I've been doing expert witness work. I think my first case that was referred to me was in 1983, so a long time ago, 40 years ago. And I've been doing work in a variety of different areas as an expert witness.
And in the expert field or expert work that you've done, have you had cases that involve police restraint or asphyxial death?
Yes.
Can you tell us about your work in that area?
So I would like to just preface that with all of my expert witness work, I've never actually solicited, never advertised for it, never asked.
I can ask a question.
Please.
In terms of your expert work, have you ever solicited that work?
No.
How does it come to you?
So people have contacted me, attorneys or physicians working with attorneys have contacted me and discussed a potential case and asked if I was willing to review that case.
And just can you give give us an idea of what kind of topics you have generally been an expert witness on?
The majority of the cases have been with allegations of medical malpractice. Someone had an unexpected bad outcome, either from an office interaction or a hospital treatment or from a procedure. And I've been asked to review the case and to offer opinions as to whether there was medical malpractice or not. That's the majority of cases that I've done. I've been in the field of medical malpractice.
And in your work as an expert witness, can you give us an idea of whether you work for the state or the plaintiff or the defense in terms of your percentage of cases, if you know?
So for all of the, taking the entirety of the work that I've done as an expert witness, and over the past 20, 25 years, it's been approximately 40% on behalf of plaintiff, 60% on behalf of defendant.
And now I asked you about your work related to police restraint or asphyxiation. Can you tell us about that work as an expert witness, please?
Yes, I have over the past several years reviewed several cases and offered opinions where the issues were deaths or injury occurring in the context of police custody, police restraint.
Of the cases that you've worked on as an expert witness, how many have been criminal versus civil cases?
All have been civil previously.
This is your only criminal case that you've worked on?
That is correct.
And as an expert witness, do you get compensated for that?
Yes.
And is that typical in all the cases that you've been involved in?
Yes.
Does the fact that you get paid as an expert witness affect your opinion at all?
No.
All right, I want to ask you about this case. What were you asked to do in this case?
I was asked to review the materials that were available, medical records pertaining to the decedent, Manuel Elijah Ellis, and also materials pertaining to the incident that occurred on March 3rd, 2020, and to offer opinions as to what caused Mr. Ellis's death.
Do you recall approximately when you were retained in the case?
In June of 2021.
And you said that there were a number of materials that you reviewed. Can you just give the jury a general idea? I know you may not have a complete list, but of the types of materials you reviewed.
Yes, so I reviewed medical records regarding Manuel Ellis dating back, I think, to 2008, various medical interactions, hospitalizations, et cetera. And then I reviewed materials that were specific to the incident on March 3rd, 2020, which included statements and interviews of the Tacoma Police Department officers who were involved.
I hate to interrupt, but if the witness is referring to a document following the stand, I'd ask that we either have the document marked or that it be identified.
I'll ask them.
I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
He's simply saying what he was given. You can ask him more detail about that if you care to.
Sure, but he's referring to a document that's at the stand. I don't know what it
He
is.
said he said he received a number of statements from law enforcement officers. He also said he received medical records associated with Mr. Ellis's health. Right? What specific, I don't remember a specific document.
No, I'm saying the witness is referring to a document
Oh,
right now.
oh, he's reading one, is what you're saying. Okay.
And I don't know
I'll
what
ask them about that. What are you looking at there, Dr.?
So I'm looking at a report that I submitted to Patty Eakes and to Kent Liu from the Attorney General's office, dated February 13, 2022.
Does it have an exhibit number on it?
Exhibit 537.
Okay, and is that a report that you prepared regarding your opinions in this case?
Yes.
And would that, looking at the report, help refresh your memory or assist you as you testify with respect to things like the documents that you reviewed in this case?
Yes.
All right. So, I'm sorry, we interrupted you. You were talking about, you reviewed statements of Tacoma police officers who were involved in this incident. What else did you review?
So statements and interviews of Tacoma Police Department officers who were involved in some fashion pertaining to the incident on March 3rd, 2020. Also, statements and interviews of Tacoma Fire Department paramedics who were involved on that day. There were also statements from some lay people, eyewitnesses, who witnessed some of the incident. I also reviewed videos that had been obtained from security cameras, a doorbell camera, and also, I think, eyewitness cell phone camera video footage. And I reviewed the autopsy report from Dr. Thomas Clark, medical examiner, and also his supplemental report. And I reviewed the toxicology report that was part of that medical examiner's report. And subsequently have reviewed expert opinion reports and interviews of defense experts and plaintiff's experts in this case.
Let me ask you about, you said you reviewed information from the Tacoma Fire Department. I put up Exhibit 24 that was admitted yesterday.
Proceed.
Should come up on your screen, not the big screen. All right, this is entitled, I believe it says pre-hospital care report. Is this a document that you reviewed, Dr. Wergelertner?
Yes.
And are you familiar with documents of this nature?
Yes.
All right, and is this one of the documents that you relied on in terms of your conclusions in this case?
Yes.
Right. You said you also looked at some interviews of the firefighters as well, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, I want to just kind of step back and ask you some pretty basic questions first of all. Can you just tell the jury, what does the heart do in terms of the overall function of your body?
Okay, in a very basic sense, and I think you all remember this from high school biology, the heart is a pump. It pumps blood throughout the body, and the heart has 4 chambers. There are 2 upper chambers that are called the atrial chambers and 2 lower pumping chambers called the ventricles. And I believe we have a demonstrative that we'll be able to use to provide a bit more detail about that.
Okay, and if you could take a look at Exhibit 561. All right, and is that an illustrative that would assist you in kind of explaining the functioning of the heart to the jury?
Yes.
And offer 561 for illustrative purposes. No objection.
561 is admitted for illustrative purposes only.
All right, it's going to come up on this screen. Would you mind stepping down, if you would? And I think that there's a pointer up there near you.
Okay, I see a scissors, you don't need to use that.
No, right there.
A pen?
There you go.
Oh, okay. There we go, okay.
All right, if you could just kind of walk us through, the basic anatomy and what you were explaining about kind of how the heart functions and what it does for our body.
Your Honor, I don't want to block your,
Don't worry about me, just make
Okay.
sure the jury's can see.
okay. So, we talked about the heart pumping blood. Now, blood carries the nutrients that all of the cells and all of the organs of the body need. Primary nutrient is oxygen. That's the fuel that every cell in your body needs. There are other nutrients that you know about, sugar, proteins, and other molecules. And the body also generates waste products that are circulated back to the heart, and many of those are ultimately excreted through the lungs. So the heart and lungs have a very intimate interaction. The lungs are on both sides of the heart, and this is the heart is facing you. So this is the right side of the heart, this is the left side of the heart. So let's talk about blood that has already circulated to the body, oxygen has been removed, and carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, and acid is deposited, and that used kind of blood is returned to the right side of the heart, coming from below and from above, going into the right atrium, which is a collection chamber, and then that blood goes into the right ventricle, which is a pumping chamber. The right ventricle pumps this blood to the lungs, left lung, right lung, and in the lungs, new oxygen is brought in, and that carbon dioxide is blown out. That's what we do with every breath. We're bringing in oxygen, and we're blowing out carbon dioxide. Bringing in that new fuel, blowing out waste product. That new oxygenated blood now returns to the left side of the heart, goes into the left atrium, which is a collection chamber, and then that's sent down to the left ventricle, which is the major pumping chamber, which then pumps that newly oxygenated blood to the whole body. And it goes through this major structure called the aorta. So the heart is pumping. It's a muscle. It's got chambers that collect and chambers that push. The heart is also an electrical organ. There is electrical activity, biologic electrical activity that goes through the heart to stimulate that muscle to contract in a coordinated fashion. And these yellow structures here, they're not actually yellow in real life, but we're doing it for illustration purposes, are the biological electrical wiring that conducts that electrical activity. So the conductor of the electrical system is this guy right here, or this gal, it's not gender specific, the SA node, sinoatrial node. The electrical activity starts here, and then it distributes through all these biological wirings throughout the heart to have a synchronized contraction pattern, so the heart functions efficiently. So you might want to think about this as if it were a symphony orchestra. And I will tell you, I don't know much about classical music at all, but I like the analogy part. In a symphony orchestra, you have a conductor who waves the baton, and all of the musicians follow the conductor in a coordinated way. So we hear beautiful music. And that's what we need to have for this heart to function effectively. We need to have beautiful music, the electrical current going in a coordinated way and stimulating the muscles to contract in a normal way.
And can you just explain to the jury kind of in simple terms how the heart beats?
So again, the heart is a muscle, and if you ever did those experiments in frogs, what we did to frogs, we dissected them and watched their hearts, contracting. The electrical activity that goes through the heart stimulates the muscle to contract. And there are all kinds of proteins and other cellular elements in those muscle cells that are coordinated and require certain chemicals and oxygen to function. So at one level, the heart is kind of a simple structure, it's a pump. But another level, it's actually a very complex structure because there's electrical activity, biochemical activity, nervous signals that come from the brain, chemicals that come from other organs that kind of tell the heart, beat faster, beat stronger, slow down, go faster. So there's a lot of interaction, a lot of activity happening in the heart.
So what does it mean to have a ventricular heartbeat?
Okay, so normally the heart starts up here, the heart beat, the heart rhythm starts in this SA node, which you see is in the right atrium, the upper chambers. Goes into the left atrium, and then going down into the ventricles. So that's the normal sequence. It starts on top and then goes to the bottom. Goes from the atrial collection chambers down into the ventricular pumping chambers. So if you have a beat that's originating in the ventricles, that's out of sequence. Going back to our analogy about the symphony orchestra. So I'm the conductor, you're supposed to be following me. But if you are the trombone player and you decide, I'm going to start this music before the conductor waves the baton, we're going to have a problem with the way this music sounds. So we don't like it when beats start in the ventricles, because that's taking out our united symphonic orchestra. So we want the impulses to start up in the SA node in the atrial chambers and then go down into the ventricular chambers.
And then what does it mean to have an atrial beat then?
So atrial beat is the normal origination focus. The SA node, which is in the right atrium, is where the normal electrical impulse starts. And these atrial chambers, they contract first. So the blood is pushed into these pumping chambers, and then these chambers then are stimulated to contract.
And you said a moment ago that the heart has both an electrical system, I guess, and a mechanical system, is that right?
Yes.
And explain to us what the difference is between those, what they have to do in order to make the heart work.
So the muscle, this is muscle here, creates a mechanical function, the squeezing of the heart. The electrical system, that electrical wiring stimulates the squeezing of the heart. So they function together. They need to be united and synchronized, but they are independent kind of systems that have different requirements for oxygen and other nutrients. So sometimes the electrical system malfunctions without the muscle malfunctioning. Sometimes you'll have muscle function that has been impaired. If it's by a heart attack, you might have an area of muscle that's damaged without affecting the electrical system. So they can divert and function independently or dysfunction independently, but ideally the electrical system and the mechanical system are coordinated, and that's how we have normal function.
And you mentioned that, and talked about the fact that the heart needs oxygen. Can you just explain to us what happens? You said, I think, that different parts of the heart, or the electrical versus the mechanical system, might require different amounts of oxygen. Can you just explain that to us?
So every organ in the body needs oxygen. Every cell in your body needs oxygen. And again, that's the fuel that allows the biochemical reactions that provide energy for all of the tissues in the body. Each body, each organ has different requirements. So for example, the brain has the most requirement for oxygen. It is most sensitive to deprivation of oxygen. There's a lot going on in our brains, and a lot of cells doing all kinds of interactions. Whereas other areas like bone doesn't require as much oxygen. It requires oxygen, requires blood flow, but it doesn't require the same ongoing, uninterrupted supply of oxygen. The heart is active, it's beating. It never takes a break. From the time you were a little embryo in your mom's uterus, your heart was beating and it never takes a rest. 24/7 it's beating, and it requires a constant, uninterrupted supply of blood and oxygen. And if it's deprived of oxygen, bad things can happen, both to the electrical system and to the mechanical pumping system.
Are the electrical and the mechanical systems the same in terms of their need for oxygen?
No, we see that the muscle is more sensitive to deprivation of oxygen. So we can have situations where the electrical system is still functioning, even though the muscle system has stopped functioning as a result of deprivation of oxygen. So that's a dissociation, where the electrical system can still be working, but the muscle system is not working because of deprivation of oxygen.
And does the amount of oxygen that our heart needs at any given time, can it change?
Sure.
Based on what?
Well, I mean, our activities, right? Sitting in a chair requires a lot less oxygen than running up 10 flights of stairs. And that's true for your muscles, but it's certainly true for the heart that has to pump more blood, and the lungs that have to bring in more oxygen if we're doing more strenuous activity. So, football player sitting on the bench is not needing nearly as much oxygen as a football player who's returning a kickoff for 100 yards and a touchdown, running at superhuman speeds. So, yes, there are varying requirements for oxygen depending on the context.
And what, if any, impact would someone who's being subjected to a taser have on the heart's oxygen needs?
Well, assuming that the taser has caused some degree of pain, any painful stimulus increases heart rate, can increase blood pressure, and that can require more oxygen. Because if the heart has to beat faster, it has to beat against a higher blood pressure, then it requires more oxygen.
And what, if any, impact would using methamphetamine have on a heart's oxygen needs?
Okay, I think I can probably go back
Yes, you
to
can,
that
I'm
seat
sorry.
here, okay. Yeah, I don't mind standing, but yeah. Okay, methamphetamine. So methamphetamine is a stimulant, powerful stimulant. So it increases heart rate, it increases blood pressure, it increases activity, and with all of those factors, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased activity, that requires more blood flow, more oxygen, more work on the part of the heart.
Are you familiar with the term hypoxia?
Yes.
And can you just explain what the word hypoxia means?
So hypoxia, Hypoxia, so that OX part you'll recognize as being similar to the OX that's in oxygen. So hypoxia means that there is a low level of oxygen and an inadequate level of oxygen in the organs and tissues of the body.
And how does hypoxia then affect the heart? What happens?
Well, we've talked about how the heart needs a continuous, uninterrupted supply of oxygen because the heart is always working. The heart is always beating. And if the heart is deprived of oxygen, it will begin to malfunction.
And what do you mean by that when you say malfunction? How so?
So we talked about the muscle function of the heart and the electrical function of the heart. So the muscle function will deteriorate if there is continued hypoxia at a severe level. And then the electrical system will malfunction as well. And ultimately, that can result in cardiac arrest. The heart stopping, there being no blood flow, and essentially cardiac arrest is death unless that individual is successfully resuscitated.
And does a cardiac arrest that results from hypoxia occur the same way as a cardiac arrest that occurs from, say, an underlying heart disease?
No.
How so?
Well, the most common heart disease that we deal with in the Western world is coronary artery disease, a blocked artery that causes a heart attack. And the blocked artery is due to cholesterol, other fatty material, debris that builds up over time and ultimately narrows the artery and then closes the artery. So that portion of the heart muscle that is no longer receiving normal blood flow and normal oxygen because of the blocked artery gets damaged. And that will cause injury to a portion of the heart muscle. Depending on how big that portion is, it can either be a small amount of damage or it can be a massive amount of damage and potentially can be a cause of cardiac arrest as a result of the damage to that heart muscle causing a malfunction of not just the muscle, but causing electrical activity that is chaotic and incompatible with life.
And how is that different than a cardiac arrest that is the result of hypoxia?
So a cardiac arrest due to hypoxia, where there isn't blocked arteries situation, is where there is inadequate oxygen delivery to the heart muscle and to the other tissues, including the electrical system in the heart. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Okay. Thought I'd turn that off. Okay. So if we think about the heart activity as a campfire, and where there's a small fire enough to kind of cook marshmallows, So if you try to smother that fire, if you throw some dirt or dust on it, or somebody kind of throws a heavy blanket on it, that fire will subside and diminish, and ultimately the fire may go out if you're efficient at trying to put the fire out. That's what it's like with hypoxia, with low oxygen. It's cutting down the oxygen to that fire. A fire needs oxygen to keep the flames going, and if you cut down the oxygen on that fire, you'll see the flames decrease in size and number, and ultimately will go out. That's what happens with the heart with hypoxia.
So when someone dies from a cardiac arrest, how do you determine whether or not, for example, it was from hypoxia that caused the heart to stop versus the heart stopped and then it caused hypoxia?
So obviously there are a lot of factors that we'd look into, but specifically looking at the electrical activity of the heart, we can get a great deal of information as to what the cause of a cardiac arrest was. And there are certain types of rhythm disorders that are associated with hypoxia, and there are other types of rhythm disorders that are associated with a primary cardiac event, either due to a heart attack or some other underlying disease process of the heart muscle. I know we have demonstratives to show these different types of rhythms. I don't know if you'd like to show those now, or...
Let's talk about it in just a couple minutes. I kind of want to just jump ahead a little bit, and then we can
Okay.
kind of talk about those things. But it sounds like you can determine whether or not it is the hypoxia that caused the heart to stop versus the heart stopping and then the hypoxia. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
All right. And so let's talk about this case for a minute. Based on your review of the materials that you just kind of talked to us about, did you reach any opinions about what the cause of death, Mr. Ellis's cause of death was?
Yes.
And if you need to refer to your report, feel free to do that. Can you tell us what your opinion is as to what caused Mr. Ellis's death?
Yes, it is my opinion that Mr. Ellis's cardiac arrest and death on March 3rd, 2020 was due to restraint asphyxia. I don't know if we've defined that term yet, asphyxia. Asphyxia is when you're making the respiratory system, the lungs, incapable of functioning normally. And that respiratory compromise led to hypoxia, inadequate oxygen, and ultimate cardiac arrest.
Now, you mentioned asphyxia a moment ago. Can you just give us a little bit more explanation about why that's important to your opinion?
Well, asphyxia means that the respiratory system, the lungs, and the lungs, of course, are organs that are surrounded by the chest cavity, which includes the rib cage. And there's also a muscle called the diaphragm that's underneath the lungs, separating the chest from the abdomen. The rib cage and the diaphragm both are involved in expanding the lungs. So if that respiratory system is not capable of functioning normally, if the lungs and the chest wall are compressed, so there can't be full expansion, then you have inadequate ability of the lungs to bring in fresh oxygen and to blow off the waste product, the carbon dioxide, and that ultimately leads to hypoxia, which is inadequate oxygen for the vital organs of the body.
And so with respect to Mr. Ellis, what did you determine was the cause of the asphyxia?
My assessment was that as a result of being in prone position, meaning lying on his abdomen on a hard surface, restrained with handcuffs and hobble restraints on the legs, and with weight applied to his chest and torso from officers being on top of him, that resulted in asphyxia, inability to have the lungs provide the oxygen that was necessary to sustain life.
I just want to try to unpack a little bit of what you said about your opinion. So it sounds like you concluded that Mr. Ellis experienced both cardiac arrest and hypoxia. Is that right?
Well, the cardiac arrest was due to hypoxia.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so tell us, in your opinion, was it the hypoxia that caused Mr. Ellis's heart to stop, or did his heart stop and then you had the hypoxia?
So, impairment of lung function, inadequate oxygen delivery to the entire body, but specifically to the heart, resulting in cardiac arrest.
And what information did you rely on in concluding that it was the hypoxia that caused the cardiac arrest?
So,
Overruled, you may answer.
So I utilized the information available from the testimony of the police officers, the fire department paramedics. As I've mentioned, the autopsy report, the medical examiner's supplemental report, and also my assessment of the pre-hospital care report and the EKG tracings that were obtained by the paramedics when they were involved in providing care to Mr. Ellis after he had his cardiac arrest.
And is that the EKG information, is that part of what the LifePack data is?
Yes,
And did you look at all of the LifePack data?
yes,
And you said you relied on the observations too of the paramedics and the information contained in that Exhibit 24, is that right?
Exhibit 24 is,
Oh, I'm sorry, the pre-hospital care report?
Yes.
That we looked at just a minute ago?
yeah.
And what information from the scene and from those sources told you that Mr. Ellis's death was a result of the hypoxia as compared to being a primary cardiac event?
Well, he was in a position, prone, restraint, compressive force applied to his back and torso. There were complaints that Mr. Ellis offered about his having difficulty breathing. There were comments from the police officers in their testimony, their interviews and statements, indicating that there was a change in the pattern of Mr. Ellis's breathing, and ultimately what was referred to as agonal, A-G-O-N-A-L, breathing, which means breathing that is ineffective and is a late stage of respiratory failure prior to cardiac arrest. Then the information available from the pre-hospital care report, the observations by the paramedics, and the sequence of loss of breathing, complete apnea, A-P-N-E-A, meaning no breathing at all, which was documented, and then loss of pulse, and the EKGs, which showed a pattern entirely consistent with hypoxia causing cardiac arrest.
Now, in the pre-hospital report and the paramedic observations, they talk about Mr. Ellis's heartbeat being bradycardic.
Yes,
Can you just explain to the jury what that, well, first of all, was that significant to you?
yes,
And why was it significant to you?
because that is a typical pattern in the sequence of things that happen when somebody has respiratory compromise and inability to deliver normal levels of oxygen. We talked about the heart, the electrical system, and the muscle system. Both of those systems are sensitive to oxygen deprivation. And one of the first things that happens when there is significant reduction in oxygen provided to the heart is that the heart rate slows. This is the beginning of the electrical system malfunctioning. The heart rate slows.
And is that what bradycardia means?
Bradycardia means slow heart rate.
All right. And what about the observations by the paramedics that Mr. Ellis's Glasgow coma scale was a 3? Was that a significant factor for you in terms of your conclusions in this case?
Well, I mean, Glasgow coma score of 3 means that the person is comatose, unresponsive. Now, that doesn't specifically tell me whether it was due to one problem or another. That tells you that he was unresponsive and at an advanced level of brain malfunction at that point.
Okay. And what about the observation that Mr. Ellis was apnemic? Was that a factor for you?
So the word is apneic,
Sorry.
A-P-N-E-I-C. So apnea means not breathing, and apneic means that the person is not breathing. So this is compatible with a situation where there is compromise of Mr. Ellis's ability to breathe and to bring in oxygen, and progressing to a point where his system is shutting down and he's having difficulty breathing, then agonal breathing, which is weak, ineffective, slow kind of breathing, which is occurring right at the doorstep of death, and then apnea, which is no breathing at all. And apnea, if not treated and reversed, will always result in death.
Now, you said you looked at the life pack data, so I want to have you look at 2739, which has been submitted by.
Time to break. Okay, we'll break at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else, and we'll be back in 15 minutes.
before, or after you had offered your initial report?
Yes.
Okay. And, did any of the information you received after you offered your initial report change your opinions in any way?
No.
And did they support your opinions,
They,
contradict your opinions?
they supported and confirmed my opinions.
All right, so you said that you looked at 2739, if we may publish your own.
I'm sorry, what was it?
2739.
Proceed.
Thank you. All right, and if you wouldn't mind taking your pointer and maybe hopping down here again, sorry to do that to you, just so that you can explain to the jury. First of all, are you familiar with this kind of data as a cardiologist?
Yes.
And how are you familiar with it?
Well, I look at this kind of data, or these kind of data plural, every day. Many times every day. You know, that's part of what I do as a cardiologist.
And we've heard the term ECG versus EKG. What are we, is that the same thing or something different?
Same thing.
All right. Okay, so if you could just take a look. Have you looked at all the life pack data in this case?
Yes.
And, all right, so let's just start here at 11:37:33. It shows an initial rhythm. And if, maybe we can't blow it up any bigger, but can you just kind of walk through the jury and explain what we're looking at here, please?
Okay, we haven't looked at a demonstrative of normal EKG. Is there any possibility we can do that now?
Sure. Why don't we take a look at about exhibit 562, and actually just on his screen first.
Yes.
You recognize 562?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
That's a EKG tracing from someone with a normal rhythm.
All right, and would that be helpful in illustrating your testimony?
I believe so.
All right, I'd offer 562 for illustrative purposes.
562 is admitted for illustrative purposes only.
Is it going to be displayed?
Yeah, it's going to show up there.
Okay, let's first the terms, normal, rhythm. This word sinus, remember we showed the schematic of the anatomy of the heart, the different chambers, and also we showed something called the SA node, sinoatrial node. I said that's the conductor. That's where the impulse starts in the sinus node. So that's the normal sinus rhythm. So now we're looking at EKG tracing. This is showing the electrical activity of the heart. Each one of these spikes here represents a contraction of the ventricles, the major pumping chambers of the heart. So there are various components to each heart cycle, and I would just like to demonstrate that. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm blocking your view.
Don't worry, I'm fine.
So this little hill here is called the P wave. P as in Peter. That's the contraction of the small upper chambers, the atrial chambers. This spike here is called the QRS. That represents the electrical activity going through the ventricles, which are the major pumping chambers, stimulating the ventricles to contract. And that's where the real muscle function of the heart is occurring. And then this small hill there is called the T, as in Thomas, wave. And that's where the electrical activity kind of, you know, if you know electrical current, it's got to flow in one direction and then go back in another direction. So that's called repolarization, resetting the electrical cycle. So that's what we see, P wave, QRS, and T wave. Now this spike, that's an important thing to remember because that's where the real muscle function is happening in conjunction with this electrical spike here, the QRS. So thank you for letting me show this because I think it's important to be able to look at the next life pack tracing.
And before we do that, let's go back to the schematic of the heart, 561. Okay. And maybe, I don't know if you can split screen. We can just go there. And maybe you could use that to kind of illustrate what you were talking about there in terms of the different electrical mechanisms.
Okay, so here's the SA node, sinoatrial node. That's where it all starts. That's the conductor, waving the baton. Electrical current comes through and the chambers contract. So starts over there, causes the atrial chambers to contract, and that's this P wave here That's the electrical impulse going into the atrial chambers. And then the electrical current travels through these bigger fibers on the right side and the left side, and that stimulates these ventricles, the major pumping chambers, to contract, and that's this QRS. And then the T wave is when the electrical current goes the other direction to recharge the electrical system to the next cycle.
Great, so if we could go back then to 2739. All right, so this is the life pack data for Mr. Ellis's treatment, is that right?
Yes.
And so tell us just kind of globally, what does this capture, the entire document?
So, well, it's looking, I mean, we have obviously had a timeline, and then this is the EKG showing the heart rhythm. And this stands for oxygen saturation. There's a device that's put either on the fingertip or the earlobe to measure the oxygen content in the blood. It also tells us about whether there's a detectable pulse. And CO2, carbon dioxide, is the waste product that the lungs exhale. Sometimes that is measured as the person breathes out, or if they're on a breathing machine, they can measure the carbon dioxide. As you see, those lines are blank, but we are seeing the EKG rhythm, and this is important information for us to kind of solve this mystery. Why did this happen? Why do you have a cardiac arrest? What caused it? So this is an important piece of information to figure out what happened.
And this strip, this portion of it called initial rhythm, was this something that was already in the pre-hospital report that you looked at before you received the life pack data?
Yes.
Can you just walk the jury through what we're seeing here? What does this mean to you as a cardiologist when you look at the initial rhythm?
Okay, so if you have in your mind what a normal rhythm looks like, you know, you have that little P wave, and then the QRS, and then the T wave. So what we're seeing here is we're not seeing normal P wave. Right? We're seeing this little kind of undulating pattern here, but it's not a normal organized P wave. You'll also see that the heart rate, the cycle length, the distance from this spike to that spike is different than the distance from this spike to that spike. So what are we seeing? It's a irregular rhythm, and we're not seeing normal sinus activity. But we are seeing these good spikes indicating that the ventricles are being stimulated, and those ventricles, the major pumping chambers, are functioning. This pattern of this irregular activity here is called atrial fibrillation. Atrial, those are the upper chambers. Fibrillation means irregular. It actually comes from the Latin word fibril, which means worm. And the reason it was given that name is because when you look at the atrial chambers in this rhythm, they look like a squiggly worms. You know, so atrial fibrillation, and this is a very common rhythm disorder, even in people who are walking and ambulatory. I have many patients that have this who are fully functional, you know, working, full time. So this is typically not something that you would see in a cardiac arrest.
And how so?
Because this rhythm is compatible with life. You have this irregularity of the atrial, but the ventricles are being stimulated. That means the muscle chambers that are pumping blood are being stimulated in a sufficient way. The heart rate isn't too fast, it isn't too slow. So just looking at this, I wouldn't say, wow, this patient must be having a cardiac arrest. I would say it's atrial fibrillation. There are issues that we can take care of in the office. This is not, when you look at it, something that's synonymous with cardiac arrest.
And it sounds like if somebody has atrial fibrillation, you can be fine, so to
Yes.
speak.
Yeah.
Okay. And so tell us, you talked a little bit about the fact that you concluded that Mr. Ellis had PEA, is that right?
Yes.
And what is PEA?
So I don't know if that term has been used yet. So PEA is an acronym. P is in Peter, E is in Edward, A is in Albert. It stands for pulseless electrical activity. And what that means is that there's electrical activity, that should be sufficient to adequately stimulate the heart muscle in a way that's compatible with life. However, the person is pulseless, meaning when you examine pulses, whether it's in the radial artery in the wrist, or carotid artery in the neck, or if you're measuring blood flow, you see that there's no pulse. So we used to call this PEA EMD. E as in Edward, M as in Mary, D as in David, electromechanical dissociation. I actually like that term better because I think it explained the situation better. But we're sticking with PEA. So electromechanical dissociation, meaning there's still electrical activity here. It's irregular, but it's okay to sustain life. Yet the dissociation, the mechanical function, is not happening. So something is causing this difference, where there's still electrical activity that's satisfactory to maintain life, but the muscle isn't functioning. So we have pulseless electrical activity.
Do you have an illustrative that would also help you explain PEA?
Yes.
Could you take a look at exhibit 558? It'll be on your screen there.
I'm sorry, what was the number?
558, thank you.
Yes.
And would that assist you, that illustrative assist you in explaining PEA to the jury?
Yes.
I'd offer 558 for illustrative purposes.
No objection. No objection for illustrative.
Objection.
558 is admitted for illustrative purposes only.
Okay. Take a look at that, please.
So again, PEA, pulseless electrical activity. So here we see, this actually is a normal sinus rhythm. Remember the P wave, QRS, T wave, that looks fine. But if there is no pulse with this rhythm, or for that matter, any rhythm which by itself should be compatible with life, if there is no pulse, despite intact electrical activity, that is called pulseless electrical activity, PEA. Person is unresponsive and no palpable pulse. There is organized cardiac electrical activity, and as I said before, previously referred to as electromechanical dissociation. Electrical function still intact, mechanical function not intact, and actually resulting in pulselessness.
If we could go back to 2739 then, please. Okay, so if we go through and we can scroll through this, at some point, are you aware that Mr. Ellis, CPR was initiated against Mr. Ellis?
Yes.
All right, and so if we can, prior to that time, do you recall what time that was approximately?
I think it was around 11:40
All right.
or 23:40.
Let's start at the initial rhythm and just kind of go through. And can you explain to the jury what you're seeing here? If you could go all the way back, please. And then we'll go forward up to the point of CPR being initiated.
So we talked about, you're seeing spikes, which means that there is electrical activity stimulating the ventricles, the major pumping chambers, but I talked about this irregularity in the atrial function, atrial fibrillation. I also talked about the fact that the cycle length is different. So there is some chaos here, in the atrial chambers, but there's still sufficient electrical stimulation that there should be mechanical function.
And was there information that Mr. Ellis didn't have the mechanical function?
Well, ultimately, he lost pulse.
Okay.
And that's, a definition of loss of mechanical function. There are ways of seeing it at an earlier stage, but in terms of examination, when you lose pulse, and it's pulseless electrical activity.
And if we could scroll forward from here to 11:40:50, I believe it is. And has all of that continued to be that?
Let's just go back a little bit here since you're here. So what's also happening, remember we talked about that campfire, no oxygen being smothered, the fire is kind of dwindling out. So what also happens is the heart rate is slowing. Look how long the distance is from this spike to that spike. So you see there's still electrical activity, but there is slowing, which is consistent with hypoxia, inadequate oxygen. Inadequate oxygen to keep that fire from going out. Here, inadequate oxygen to keep the heart from going out. So this is a pattern that is entirely consistent with hypoxia, restraint asphyxia causing hypoxia, causing PEA, cardiac arrest.
And is that the same as bradycardia in terms of what you see?
Bradycardia is slow heart rate. Bradycardia doesn't imply that it's atrial fibrillation, it's just referring to the rate itself.
Okay. All right, we could continue to go forward to 11:40. Stop us at any point if you want to explain.
So it's more of this atrial fibrillation. You see again, you know, here it's varying cycle length. Here it's very slow. Picks up a bit. So we're at 11:40. Keep going. Okay, so let's come back earlier. So now there's been a transition. This is the atrial fibrillation with spikes. So there's still electrical activity, and now we're going into really no electrical activity. This is just some meaningless kind of squiggle. That's asystole, flat line. You know, on the TV shows they show it as a straight black line, but often it's just like this, where there's really no meaningful activity, just, you know, minimal squiggle. So that's asystole. That's a more advanced kind of stage of electrical degeneration. Sometimes this occurs before the PEA, sometimes after, but here you had the atrial fibrillation and now asystole.
We can scroll forward there, and then what do we see when the asystole kicks in?
So this is when CPR is started, and we're talking CPR stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So there are various components to that. One is that you're all familiar with, external cardiac massage. You know, pressing on the chest wall to basically push the heart. The heart has stopped, there's no pulse, and you're pushing through the chest wall to try to compress the heart, to kind of make that heart at least pump some blood to try to restore circulation and restore life. And you're seeing the spikes related to that kind of compression.
Okay. And if we scroll forward a little bit, do you see that continue, or why do we see kind of a discontinuation?
Well, the
there?
lead is off, so you're not getting a signal here. This is
Okay.
lead off, meaning the lead that monitors the electrical activity fell off, which often happens.
Again, is that consistent with more CPR?
Yes.
All right, and then we see at least according to this life pack, it says CPR was started at 11:41,
Yes.
42, thereabouts. And is that, again, consistent with what we saw prior to that, all consistent with there being CPR from about 11:40, 50?
Yes.
You can take your seat again if you want for a second. So, Doctor, can you tell the jury what causes PEA?
So there are a variety of things that can cause PEA. Most notably is hypoxia, low oxygen, due to respiratory failure. And that respiratory failure can be due to a variety of things. It can be due to somebody that has severe emphysema and lungs have just kind of stopped functioning and the oxygen level drops to a level that is inadequate to sustain cardiac function. It can also be in a situation where there is external compression, restraint, and that is what we would refer to as prone restraint asphyxia, that as a result of the individual being in a prone position, abdomen down on a firm surface, restrained, handcuffs, hobbles, compression related to weight being applied to the chest. The lungs are not able to expand adequately, not able to meet the needs of the body for oxygen. and then that results in pulseless electrical activity. The muscle of the heart is more sensitive to that oxygen deprivation than the electrical activity. So the muscle is now quit on us, but the electrical activity is still ongoing, albeit in a bit of a irregular way. So you still see electrical activity, but no pulse because the muscle is no longer functioning.
Can you just explain to us how hypoxia can lead to BEA? What's the...
Okay, so oxygen is the fuel for the body, for all the cells in the body. And some cells need the oxygen more than others. We talked about the brain being very sensitive to shutdown of oxygen. The heart is also sensitive. And there is a dissociation between muscle and the electrical system. The muscle cells, which are squeezing, need oxygen more than the electrical system, which is sending down signals. So if there is inadequate oxygen, meaning inadequate fuel, the muscle cells will tell you about it first, because you'll lose pulse, because the muscles are just, instead of squeezing, are now hardly squeezing or not squeezing at all. The electrical current is still flowing. It can be irregular, but still there until eventually you can get asystole, flatline, when there's no electrical activity, no muscle activity, cardiac standstill, death, unless there's successful resuscitation.
So let's talk about, you said that Mr. Ellis, your opinion is that Mr. Ellis's hypoxia was a result of the restraint and the compression on him. Tell us what that's going to look like from the outside in terms of what observations would you have of what Mr. Ellis was experiencing, to a person observing him?
Object foundation.
I would sustain that objection. You can ask him about what the time frames would be.
I will ask him about that in a moment, Your Honor. Let me just ask you first of all, Doctor, do you know, based on your experience, what, and the records that you've reviewed in this case, what observable things will you see with Mr. Ellis or another individual who's undergoing that lack of oxygen? What outward signs are you going to have of it?
Make the same objection.
I'll back up if you want. Have you seen people who...
I'm just, you're trying to say where would the force be positioned
No,
and
I'm asking about the physical, the response that you're going to see from the person in terms of slowing down, their body slowing down, becoming unresponsive. Those responses in...
so what responses would be manifest by Mr. Ellis
Correct,
if something like this were occurring to him?
yes.
I permit that.
Okay, that was a better question than mine. Can you answer the judge's question?
Thank you, Your Honor, for rephrasing the question, yeah. So initially, you would see someone struggling to try to breathe better. So if they're in a position where they're not able to fully expand their lungs, they're going to try to struggle to get that weight off their chest so they can expand their lungs. They might make comments, as Mr. Ellis did, that I can't breathe. And as oxygen levels diminish, and remember the lungs also are necessary for clearing out carbon dioxide, the waste product, so that's accumulating. That also has negative effects. The person's level of consciousness fades because the brain isn't getting enough oxygen. And you get brain fog, so the person's not responsive. And there are comments by some of the officers in their interviews talking about how Mr. Ellis had that like 1,000-yard, 1,000-mile stare, like he was out of it, not responsive. And then ultimately, of course, with the cardiac arrest, we have someone whose cardiac standstill, no pulse, no blood pressure, no activity, no movement, no responsiveness.
So in this situation, did you find medical evidence that Mr. Ellis was in fact suffering from PEA and having those effects?
Yes.
Right, in terms of the life pack, if we can go back to that for just a moment, the information from it. You talked about at the beginning that there being importance of the initial rhythm. Can you just explain to us what you meant by that?
Yes. So as far as trying to determine what caused the cardiac arrest, looking at the EKG at the time of the cardiac arrest, or as close to the actual time of the cardiac arrest as possible, and particularly before there's been any intervention. In other words, before the first responders have administered any medication or done any electric shocks, looking at that initial rhythm is evidence as to what caused the cardiac arrest. By looking at the pattern, is there electrical activity? Is there no electrical activity? Is there some kind of abnormal rhythm that would be primarily responsible for cardiac arrest? Or is there an electrical rhythm that tells us this isn't primarily a heart issue, it's something external to the heart, like a lung problem, like a respiratory problem, that caused this cardiac arrest?
Okay, and so with respect to the initial rhythms here, you said that it's important to look at them before the first responders start providing any sort of drugs on board, I guess is what you're saying. Is that
Yes.
right? And why is that important? What changes once they start doing that?
Yeah, so I would use the word medication rather than drugs because it's a different kind of implication. So, for example, one of the medications that's commonly used in people that have cardiac arrest is a medication called epinephrine. It's also known by the lay term adrenaline. And that is a stimulant, a very powerful stimulant. We use it because we're trying to get the heart to regain function, but it will have its own impact. It can cause the heart to beat very rapidly, very erratically. We don't like for that to happen, but it's kind of the price you pay or the risk you're willing to take to try to get the heart back. Because after all, this patient's going to die if you don't restore rhythm. So it's important to look at the heart in a pre-medication state to see what's happening as a result of whatever factors are at play. Once you've given epinephrine, you've changed the whole equation here because now you may see rhythm abnormalities that are due to the epinephrine and not reflective of what the underlying primary problem was.
And does the pre-hospital report, Exhibit 24, does that cover, does that include times that epinephrine and other medications were given, as well as record whether it was at various points where there was pulselessness?
Yes.
Let's go back to Exhibit 24 then. And if you could just kind of step down here and we can put it up, we'll kind of go through the different pages. This is the first page. Okay, and maybe you can just scroll down to the additional pages. And by the way, let me stop there. Oops, sorry. That paragraph that it describes the rapid patient assessment, is that consistent, or the observations that are in here about Mr. Ellis's condition, are those consistent with what you saw on the life path?
Yes.
All right, let's go down. All right, so maybe you can just walk us through what we're looking at here on this page.
Okay, we were talking about epinephrine, medication that's given, and it typically is given for something like PEA. or asystole. There are other types of cardiac arrest where you would not want to give epinephrine, because that would not help and it could hurt. And those other kinds of rhythm problems are typically treated with an electric shock to try to reboot the heart to restore a regular rhythm. When you're giving epinephrine, you're giving it either because it's PEA or asystole. And what you're trying to do is restore the heart to function. Because with PEA and asystole, the heart is not functioning. There's pulselessness and no muscle function. So if 2342 epinephrine is given, so again, and it's multiple doses of epinephrine that are given. So that can change the landscape of the heart rhythm completely. So if you're seeing rapid heartbeat, tachycardia, which is the term for rapid heartbeat, after epinephrine, that doesn't tell you what the root cause of this cardiac arrest was, because the epinephrine alone can cause those kinds of abnormal rhythms. So it's very important to see what the rhythms were prior to the administration of epinephrine, because that can give us information about what the root cause was, what caused this cardiac arrest.
Can we scroll down, please? Did the pre-hospital report also capture the times at which, and if you could stop there for just a second, the times at which Mr. Ellis was noted to be without a pulse?
Yes.
All right, so first of all, can you see it on this screenshot that we have here?
No.
Maybe,
No.
go up a little bit more. Down, I'm sorry, other way. On the vitals there?
Yes, so here you see time, entry for pulse, 0 means 0 pulse. RESP stands for respirations, 0 respirations, no breathing at all. And at this point, BVM, bag valve mask, they're bagging him, breathing for him, to try to bring oxygen into his body.
Okay, so we see on this first entry at 23:42:11, Mr. Ellis has no pulse. And is that before or after the first epinephrine is administered? And if you want to scroll back down.
4.
Okay, and so is that significant to you in your conclusion that Mr. Ellis had PEA?
Well, in conjunction with the EKG tracings that we saw, yes.
Okay, and if we could go down, continue on the page. Are there other notations, the next page, sorry, about whether or not Mr. Ellis had a pulse at various points?
So this is the pulse line. You're not seeing the caption. So 0 pulse, this is respiration, 0 respiration. So no pulse, no breathing. He's mechanically assisted. They're breathing for him.
All right, let's go back to the prior page for just a moment on 2. So we also saw that there was a list of treatments, and you can see here that there's a list of using the BVM. You see that? 23:36:53. Would the use of the BVM have any impact on what you're seeing on the EKG?
It could indirectly, but not directly. It would not affect the EKG.
Right. Take your seat again.
Okay.
Like, Right, I think you talked a minute ago about the fact that your opinion is that the cause of the hypoxia was prone positioning and restraint and compression on Mr. Ellis. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you explain how that actually occurs? Is there anything else that you, let me strike that, with respect to the prone restraint, is there a specific amount of time that you would need to be in a prone position, weighted, to cause sufficient hypoxia to affect the heart?
There is no specific or minimum amount of time because there are many variables that are at play here. Because you're talking about an equation, oxygen supply and oxygen demand. So, for example, one of you sitting here is needing a lot less oxygen, as we mentioned, than the person running up 10 flights of stairs with a 80-pound backpack on. So if you're in a situation where your oxygen requirement is high, you will be more sensitive to a situation where your lungs are not able to expand to bring in extra oxygen. So it's a function of all of those variables. How much oxygen is the body requiring? How much oxygen are the lungs able to bring in? So somebody in a situation where they have heightened oxygen requirement can succumb to the effects of oxygen deprivation far more quickly than someone who's resting and not having increased oxygen requirement, where they can sustain their normal heart function for a longer period of time, even if their lungs are compressed.
And do you have an opinion as to where Mr. Ellis was on the spectrum in terms of what his oxygen needs were based on the materials you've reviewed?
Object to the foundation.
I'm sorry?
Object to the foundation.
Well, first of all, does he have an opinion? I'll allow the question.
Do you have an opinion?
Yes, I do.
And what is your opinion?
Again, I'm gonna object foundation and ask for why hearing. I think that's the jury. I've never heard this before.
All right, we'll take a moment to do that outside the presence of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse us. Please do not discuss the case. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Conrad.
Well, doctor, so what is your opinion?
My opinion is that Mr. Ellis was in a situation where he had increased oxygen requirements,
What is that based off of?
based on the fact that he had methamphetamine in his system, which stimulates the metabolism and increases oxygen requirements. Also based on the fact that he was involved in a physical struggle, and that's physical exertion that increases oxygen requirements. He also had a heart that was somewhat enlarged, and that also creates an additional requirement for oxygen.
Okay. I'll withdraw my objection if that's what he's gonna state.
So will I. Unless there's more.
I was surprised you guys had a problem with it, to be honest with you.
didn't know what he was gonna say, because I had never heard that before.
Well, it makes sense from everything else I've heard so far, so I'm not surprised by the answer. Okay. But before the jury broke, did you say something like a person who is in a high demand need for oxygen can succumb fairly rapidly to a restriction of oxygen? Did you say that or words to that effect?
Oh, yes, I said that there is a variable amount of time that's required depending on the oxygen supply-demand relationship. So that someone in a situation where they require more oxygen will succumb to the effects of decreased oxygen supply sooner than someone who's not in a state of increased oxygen demand. I didn't give a quantitative amount of time. I didn't say.
No, I didn't say that, but I thought you said that it could be a fairly rapid, maybe I got that word.
I don't recall that I used the term rapid. I
Okay.
might have, but I don't recall.
maybe our court reporter can tell us. Jessica, can you go back to just before the jury broke and the answer the doctor was giving just before the jury left us? And if you've got that, could you reread it for us?
You want me to read the whole answer, or just for the word rapid?
The word rapid may not have been used. I could have got that wrong. That's why I was trying to find out.
The judge, what he said is there's no specific, but it could be a minimum amount of time.
I'm interested in the answer. Not sure,
It's just a very long answer, so I didn't know.
go ahead and read the whole thing. I know it's a long answer. It was near the end of it, I believe, but
There is no specific or minimum amount of time because there are many variables that are at play. You're talking about the equation, oxygen supply and oxygen demand. So for example, one of you sitting here is needing a lot less oxygen, as we mentioned, than the person running up 10 flights of stairs with an 80-pound backpack on. So if you're in a situation where your oxygen requirement is high, you will be more sensitive to a situation where your lungs are not able to expand to bring in extra oxygen. So it's a function of all of those variables, how much oxygen is the body requiring, how much oxygen are the lungs able to bring in. So somebody in a situation where they have heightened oxygen requirement can succumb to the effects of the oxygen deprivation far more quickly than someone who's resting and not having increased oxygen requirement, where they can sustain their normal heart function for a longer period of time, even if their lungs are compressed.
yeah, far more quickly, I guess I picked up as rapid. Thank you. I just want to make sure about that. Well, by the time I get the jury in here, it's going to be noon. Let's bring them back anyway. We'll see if we can get at least another few minutes.
I needed oxygen to breathe. Okay, let's quiet, guys. Let's quiet.
Okay, welcome, please be seated, everybody. My understanding is the objections are withdrawn, so proceed.
Doctor, I believe right before we took the break, I was asking you if you had an opinion as to what Mr. Ellis's where Mr. Ellis's oxygen needs fell on that spectrum that you just spoke of.
Yes, I have an opinion.
And what's your opinion?
My opinion is that Mr. Ellis was in a situation where there was a significantly increased oxygen requirement.
And why was he in a situation of a significantly increased oxygen requirement?
There are several reasons. One is that he did have methamphetamine in his system. Methamphetamine stimulates the metabolism of the body and creates a situation where the body needs more oxygen. Secondly, he was involved in a physical struggle. He was trying to move the officers off of his back, and that involves muscular exertion, which requires more oxygen. Third reason is that we know from autopsy findings that his heart was somewhat enlarged, and a heart that's somewhat enlarged needs more oxygen. So that's a third reason. And then we earlier mentioned the fact that he had had a taser, and assuming that that caused some pain, any pain response increases the need for oxygen because it elevates heart rate and elevates blood pressure.
I'm just going to transition to another topic if you want me to keep going or stop there.
We're about 30 seconds from noon, so I guess it's a good time to break. We'll take that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our recess at this time. Please do not discuss the case. Please be back by 1:15. Thank you very much.